Welcome to this DDi CADcast What's New series. My name is Quentin Rock, and today we will cover the What's New 2015 enhancements to the user interface. There are several user interface enhancements that we'll cover, but here's a quick list of everything that'll be in this CADcast. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first user interface enhancement in 2015 is the addition of a new configurations toolbar. Let's jump into SolidWorks and take a look at that. Basically, they've just added a new toolbar for configurations, and you can turn on toolbars through the view menu or just right click like I did in the command manager area. And what this does is it gives you access to the same configurations that you have, but you don't have to switch tabs to get to one of these other configurations. So instead of going over here and switching, you can just activate them here. And it's also a toolbar, so if you do choose to dock it, you can dock it somewhere on screen as well. Our next 2015 user interface enhancement is the ability to customize the context-sensitive toolbars. And what that is when you click on a face or a feature or an edge, you get this little kind of shadow toolbar that comes up. You also see that at the top of the right click menus. Notice in the feature tree you get that in context toolbar. So in 2015 you can now customize or add buttons to that in context toolbar. To do so, it's very similar to most toolbars as you right click and choose customize. Then you'll see that it gives me a little preview of what it has. Now these buttons on here are the default buttons. Those are something you can't remove. However, you can add to these buttons. So for example, if my work or my product, typically we do a lot of offsetting of surfaces. Maybe when I right click on a face or I click on a face that I want to be able to have a quick command to get to the offset surface. And you'll notice even no matter where I drag it, it always puts it at the end of those defaults that are in there. So once I click OK and I right click, you'll now see that I have the ability to offset the surface. And remember, or one other note to keep in mind is these context sensitive toolbars are context sensitive. So if I go to this in the feature manager tree and right click on a feature, you'll see that I have a different toolbar than when I clicked on a face. So if you want to adjust those, you may have several spots where you can customize this toolbar. Another great enhancement to 2015 user interface is grouping features in favorites folders. What you can do now is add subfolders or groups to the favorites folder by just right clicking and choosing add to new favorite folder. You can then give it a name as normal. You can drag items in and out and reorder items inside the features folder as well. One thing to note, if you do that and you do decide you want to remove it, instead of removing from favorites, you can just remove the folder from the favorites and that will bring it back to the top level. The next interface enhancement to take a look at is the magnifying glass access. And what that is just taking that magnifying glass that used to be available by clicking the G key on the keyboard, actually still is available by clicking the G key on the keyboard or a hotkey, is now a button. So it's now got a toolbar button that you can add to toolbars. It's available in the select pull down menu by default, but you can also go to tools, customize, and add that button to any toolbar now. So instead of using the hotkey G, you can now use the magnified selection toolbar. The next enhancement to take a look at is modifying dimensions. And all this basically is just a little bit of a change to how the modify dialog box works. And I just have a slide here to kind of show you in comparison. A few things have been changed. Instead of in 2015 when you start typing numbers, instead of showing a list of previously used values, they've taken that out because most times that those numbers are irrelevant. It's a different dimension. It's not the same one as the one before. They've also added a little bit smarter type ahead functionality. So for example, if you type in A for the dialog box, it'll start looking for any global variables by the letter A and also any functions that start with the letter A. So a small enhancement to the way the modified dimension dialog box works. The next user interface enhancement is saving and restoring settings. And you've always been able to do this in SolidWorks by going to the Copy Settings wizard and using the Save/Restore Settings tool. What they've done in 2015 is actually added this tool to the interface inside of SolidWorks. You'll get it from the Tools pull-down menu, Save/Restore Settings, and it'll bring up that same Copy Settings wizard that you're normally used to seeing. But you no longer have to close SolidWorks to save or restore these settings. What you'll also notice is if I click to the next button here is one of the new settings you can save/restore are mouse gestures, and you probably saw that asterisk in the slide there. So you can now save and restore settings from inside of SolidWorks instead of having to close it down, run the tool, launch it back up. You can just do it inside of the software now. Another great user interface enhancement is the Selection Context Toolbar. If we jump inside of SolidWorks, you'll see that you get those context toolbars popping up on a face feature. We also saw earlier that you're able to customize those. But there's a new one for the graphics area that's just called the Selection Context Toolbar. And it brings up a lot of the common selection tools. For example, it's got a flyout for all the filters here. It's got that new button we talked about for Magnify Selection. It's also got a new button called Previous Selection, which is I found very useful when you're selecting a few faces or items and you accidentally click off. You can now use that previous selection to bring those back up. So it should be a little time saver and a little less frustration using that previous selection toolbar. Another interesting enhancement to the user interface is just something sort of built into the software that aids you in the selection of small entities. If we jump in SolidWorks, I'll let you know what I'm talking about here. You see these little bosses on this part? If you want to grab that fillet where that boss meets the base part, sometimes it's difficult to get that fillet. You end up getting only edges. In SolidWorks 2015, if you kind of scroll repeatedly over an area or you go a little bit slower when you scroll, it will try and recognize that you're trying to get some of these smaller faces instead of having to zoom in to click the face. So for example, let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. Now what I can do is just kind of hover over and you can see it's a lot easier to get the face. That probably doesn't come across great in the video, but it's a lot easier to select some of these smaller entities when you're further zoomed out in SolidWorks 2015. In 2015, you can now save what's called selection sets. This could be done in a model, a part assembly, or a drawing. Anything that you can select, you can now save those selections to bring back up. We saw earlier the previous selection button, but that's only good for one back. If you have a very common set of things that you select, you can now save those. So let's jump into SolidWorks and take a look. For example, if I grab a couple of these faces, I can now choose to save the selection here in the right-click menu. What that does is it puts it at the top of the feature tree in a selection set folder. You can see I already have some previous items. By default, it just names it selection set 1 and then 2 and then 3 and so on. It also puts in parentheses how many items are in each selection set. So this is very useful if you're trying to figure it out and you haven't renamed those selection sets to something that makes a little bit more sense there. To remove a selection set, just right click and simply remove it. While we're on the topic inside of an assembly, you can also have parts. Because parts and components and subassemblies are selectable, you can also use those to group or make selection sets. This is also very useful, I've found, in simulation where you commonly pick a lot of faces or something to apply a load or a force to, you can now use those selection sets to get back to those things a lot quicker. Once you've sat there and hit control a bunch of times and finally got all those faces, why not save those as a selection set? This next enhancement is probably more of extended functionality than an overall enhancement, but it's an improvement in the way you can set multiple dimensions to the driven state. So for example, let's say in previous versions, if I wanted to mark multiple dimensions, these two dimensions to driven, what I had to do was go to the other tab in the property manager for both those dimensions and check driven. Now what I can do with two dimensions selected is just simply right click and choose driven from the right click menu. So when you have multiple selections, that option was just not available in the right click menu. You had to go to the property manager. So it's just a rather small little enhancement or an extension to some of the functionality that's already been in SolidWorks previously. Our next enhancement is another subtle reorganization type enhancement. If we go ahead and jump into SolidWorks, what we're talking about is in the shortcut menu, you'll notice that it's changed a little bit, or it's a little bit different. What they've done is taken a few of the less common commands and only displayed them in the full menu, where you're able to go ahead and click the double arrows at the bottom and see the full menu rather than the abbreviated menu. They've also taken things and put a few more of these flyouts. So a lot of these features that's in the sketch entities used to show up in the right click by default. Most of those are now going to be grouped into this or the full menu again. Things like sketch tools is another example. So it's just a subtle reorganization of how that right click menu, shortcut menu shows. This next enhancement's a small one, but it's just mainly a rename of the SolidWorks Office Products tab in the command manager has now been renamed to SolidWorks Addin. So you'll notice in your tree, if you have the default tabs turned on, the SolidWorks Addin replaces the Office Products button. And this is where you could quickly launch some of the add-ins that you would normally have to go to the Tools Add-ins menu to turn on. Many of these add-ins have been in there already, like motion and routing and simulation, but in addition they now have buttons for flow simulation, plastics, and inspection inside of 2015 on the SolidWorks Addins toolbar. So just a small rename of an existing toolbar button or tab. Another great enhancement to 2015 user interface is the status bar display of cylindrical faces or diameters. Inside SolidWorks, what this is if we click on a cylindrical face, you'll now see down at the bottom right in the status bar the diameter. If you click on a radial face, you can also get the radius dimension or the radius value for that face as well. So it's a small little enhancement to the status bar interface, but a nice one in 2015. A small but convenient enhancement to 2015 user interface is switching from models to drawings. And what this is just in the context toolbars now. That open drawing command from previous versions is now available in the context and the right click menus. So it just makes it a little easier or a little quicker, a little less mouse travel to go ahead and switch from a drawing or from a model to its respective drawing. Users of 2015 will also benefit from a reorganization or a modification of the Tools pull-down menu inside of SolidWorks. So if we go to Tools, you'll notice now that there's a new area called SolidWorks Applications where many of the tools that were just in subsections underneath the Tools menu have now been grouped into this flyout tool. You'll also notice that all the Express products have been grouped into the flyout tool. So they've just gone and reorganized a little bit of the tools menu to group things that need to be grouped a little bit better together. Our last user interface enhancement is one of our favorites on the DDi Tech team, and that is the visual tool for references. If we jump into SolidWorks, what this is if you hover over a feature, you'll see these arrows in the tree showing you the parents of that. So it's showing you the parent-child relationships. You'll notice if you just scroll, you don't get those arrows. So they're pretty much out of the way most times. But if you actually stop on a feature for just a second or two and hover over it, you'll see that you get those arrows in there. If you don't have this function enabled by default out of the box, you can go ahead and click this button at the top of the tree. So just right click on the name at the top of the tree there, and you'll see this last little button. It's called Dynamic Reference Visualization. If you click that, that'll go ahead and enable it. One of the neat things is when you're in an assembly too, if you hover over a mate, you can get the feedback as well. You can see the parent-child or the relationship of where these are referenced as well. When things are a little bit scrolled down where you can't see the entire thing, what it does is it actually just puts a little arrow out there and then it names the feature kind of in a little tooltip there of where it is, since you can't get all the way to the top of the tree and still show this mate on screen. So it's a small little enhancement. Again, if you don't like it, or if you don't have it turned on, you can always toggle it by going to this at the top of the tree, right clicking and choosing Dynamic Reference Visualization. Well, that wraps up this CADcast on the user interface enhancements to SolidWorks 2015. For more topics, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/DDiCAD or our tech blog at ddicad.com/techcenter. Thanks for watching.